President Trump and Xi Jinping holding their anticipated call yesterday. President Trump called it a positive one, saying that the focus was on trade and rare earth minerals. Here's the president. Watch.
The agreement was we're going to have Scott and Howard and Jameson will be going and meeting with their top people and continue it forward. But I think we're in very good shape with China and the trade deal. We have a deal with China, as you know, but we were straightening out some of the points, having to do mostly with rare earth, magnets, and some other things. So I would say we have a deal, and we're going to just make sure that everybody understands what the deal is. He invited me to China, and I invited him here. We've both accepted. So I'll be going there with the First Lady at a certain point, and he'll be coming here, hopefully, with the First Lady of China.
A new Treasury report from yesterday shows the U.S. did not label China as a currency manipulator. Joining me now is Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to get your take. I mean, the list is so long, as we both know, Gordon, of the ways that China undermines the United States. Am I naive? And you know, maybe I am. Am I naive to be disappointed that President Trump did not, as far as I know, push Xi Jinping on the constant undermining of Americans and the constant efforts to kill American citizens?
Well, you're in very good company, because almost everybody thought that there would be a trade agreement and that the Chinese would enforce it, but clearly they haven't. And President Trump needs to say that clearly. He needs to say, we had a deal. The Chinese agreed to lift the export ban on rare earths. They have failed to do so. And President Trump needs to then say, I'm imposing costs on China. Now, going to China is something that Beijing wants. From Beijing's point of view, that is the American president submitting to the Grand Celestial Court. And this is not going to help matters at all. So we need to be very clear about this. And I think that essentially the markets, they may not like what we need to do, but eventually we're going to need to do it, because the Chinese right now believe that they do not have to comply with their May 12th agreement.
Yeah, but I'm not even just talking about trade. I mean, I'm talking about the smuggling of a deadly fungal. I'm talking about the flow of fentanyl, COVID cover-up. I'm talking about the constant, consistent efforts to kill American citizens by the Communist Party of China. The detention hearing for one of the suspected Chinese bioterrorists accused of smuggling that dangerous pathogen into the United States was postponed until next week. The Michigan University researcher is seeking private counsel before the next hearing, which happens on June 13th. Her and her boyfriend is also a Chinese national accused of agro-terrorism. He's already back in China, Gordon. We have a conversation that the two of them had about how they're going to get this pathogen into the United States. I'm going to hide it in my shoes, they talked about. I mean, am I naive to be disappointed that these things don't come up in these phone calls?
Yes, it should. China launched a biological weapons attack against the United States. And this instance with the fungus, it is just the latest. Go back to 2020, Maria. Then Americans in all 50 states received unsolicited seeds from China. I believe that that was an attempt to plant invasive species in the United States. That was not isolated, because we know this year Temu, the online Chinese site, was sending seeds to Americans unsolicited. So this is an attempt to take down American agriculture. Now you add on COVID, that's 1.2 million Americans dead. You have fentanyl. This is just an attack on us. And we need to just understand, we should not be trading with China. We shouldn't be investing with China. We need to understand that they are intending to take down our country. And until we get serious about this, the Chinese will continue to kill Americans. And what can I say?
This is unbelievable. I mean, you know, how do you trust a partner who you're trying to do deals with, who's actively out there trying to kill American citizens? I mean, look, we know that one of these individuals has ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and we know the laws of Communist China, that you have to follow the party's direction and orders. that you have to go back and report what you know, you have to spy and report to the CCP. And so the laws are the laws there. And we know all of this. And to have this, we just saw the conversation that they were having on screen about hiding this in the shoes, and that the teacher, they call him the teacher, gave them this pathogen to deliver and bring into the United States. It's extraordinary.
And it's extraordinary that we're having trade talks with a country that just launched this biological weapons attack and has been doing so for, what, half a decade? You know, in addition to all the other things that we've been talking about, we should not be having trade talks with China. We should be having talks among the American people about how to defend ourselves from this malicious, evil regime. And until we do that, the Chinese are going to continue to assault us because they think that we're weak. We, by the metrics, are the strongest nation on earth by far. But the Chinese believe that we are one of the weakest because we cannot rally ourselves to defend ourselves from a known attack. You know, the Chinese might be right about that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, OpenAI says it is seeing an increase in Chinese groups, Chat GPT, for covert operations. The report shows several examples of accounts making posts online on political topics relevant to China, including criticism of President Trump and the closure of U.S. aid, Gordon. So there's that, on top of the intellectual property theft happening for so many years. At the same time, the U.S. is incredibly connected to communist China. They produce everything, right? So it's not so easy to say, okay, we're just going to decouple, Gordon. But President Trump understands his customer, I think. He's getting tough on China with these tariffs, just as the Chinese economy is weakening. People don't realize how weak the economy there is, so it's the right timing to get tough. But what's your reaction there?
Well, President Trump in his first term, towards the end of it, instituted a program so that we would produce in the United States active pharmaceutical ingredients. And we need to do that again on an emergency basis. We know our vulnerabilities, and we know the Chinese have threatened to cut off pharmaceuticals to the U.S., and yet we don't do anything about it. So again, the Chinese can see that we are not protecting the American people. And this is, of course, with rare earths. People have talked about this vulnerability for at least a decade. Yeah. And again, we don't mine it, we don't produce it, we don't refine it. So yes, of course, we're going to be vulnerable, but we need to take these on an emergency basis. Yeah. We're not as vulnerable as the Chinese think we are, but nonetheless, yes, we do have this critical opening where we need to do something about it. Yeah,
well, that's why President Trump is trying to encourage, and if not, in some ways bully these corporate giants to bring their production to America. We need to protect this country. Gordon, it's great to get your insights always. Thank you, sir.